that they're changing my voice. When one considers that American culture is disproportionately conservative, and that conservatives dominate the government historically, not just Republicans, but people with conservative thinking on the spectrum. They dominate the police force and the military and the schools. And you have these religious schools, Catholic schools, Christian schools, your military schools, boarding schools, reform schools. Meeting halfway with conservatives is really just being a conservative, because they dominate the country and its culture so much historically. Rock and roll stars, for example, they don't influence the culture beyond getting people who come from certain demographics to go along with it. It just influences the poor. But conservatives basically dominate the governing class, and then every once in a while there's some liberal in San Francisco with a lot of money, some Democrat, progressive, whatever, and they're woke and they're there to keep down the left instead of to organize for responsible policy. So here in part 3, I'd like to point out that Kirk is another word for church. I believe it's in Scottish. We also get the word Charlie for Charlie Hebdo, the shootings, the massacre that occurred in France. The Charlie Hebdo shooting was about freedom of expression. That was the message that the elite sent when they gave the order to cause that shooting to occur. Now, we live on a planet where psychological operations dominate the culture. And the psychological operations are done on behalf of the elite that lobby the government to have certain policies and to put certain people in positions, people in their same social clubs, what have you, on a lower level, in order to make sure that things happen a certain way. And I'm sure that everyone knows this is the truth here. So when we see that Charlie Kirk has a name that goes along with their pattern of wordplay, Masonic wordplay, occult wordplay, magic spell and spelling. The powers of words, right? The Bible says in the beginning was the word, the gospel, the ghost spell, and so on and so forth. We see that it lines up. We start to see an overwhelming amount of evidence. And it's so overwhelming that we don't see people trying to debate me about this. There's many people who believe all kinds of crazy things. Millions of people who have crazy New Age beliefs. Some of them think that they're aliens or something. But nobody tries to debate me on this because they know I'm right, and they know that to debate me on this is to highlight why I'm right. So we see that Charlie Kirk makes the insane and emotional, the crazy argument that saying that America is racist is magically incorrect. When America, in a strong sense, is like the most racist country in the world, and when it comes to global influence and the accompanying mass starvation and mass murder through proxy of the underdeveloped world and more, America very well may be the most racist country that has ever existed. So when you're in a country where a lot of people feel strongly about racism and don't want to be in a racist country, and your country has stooped to the level of being what is perhaps the most racist country that has ever existed because of what it's done through the CIA, through proxy, through its alliances with the eugenic run, the eugenicist run Western world. Is the answer to cover it up and try to save face? If your child was being raped every day in church, you think the answer is to try to sweep it under the rug? Or to go out there and face them? In a country where 1 in 4 little girls are sexually molested before the age of 18 and 1 in 6 little boys, everyone knows that that kind of activity on that level comes from Western culture. If we see it abroad, it's only after Western culture came abroad. What would happen if someone like me was the chief of a tribe and he caught wind that little boys are being molested? Well, heads would roll. What happens in the West? They cover it up. They refuse to process their rape kits. The Catholic Church and the Protestant churches pay out money to the victims. And quite often they don't serve any time in jail, and it continues. Because what type of a message does that send to child molesters? The word rapist and racist are connected. The people who are such rapists that they turn a blind eye to child rape to that degree, are people who you must know aren't above being racist. And racist in despicable ways. Whether it is the most racist country or not depends on which country or countries gives its marching orders. The only thing that would save America from the title of the most racist country that ever existed by its actions, by its so-called leadership, is if another country, Israel, the UK, what have you, gives its marching orders. Either way, its guilt is extreme, and I urge you all to stop being cowards and to face your oppressors. To face them by rallying to me for peaceful protests, demanding that they debate you, and getting the message out in various ways, and many of them are very obvious, and doing a much better job of getting the message out than any other group. Either way, America's part is unforgivable, and I expect every Christian to know that whether they know I'm here or not. So I expect every Christian to know that whether they know I'm here or not. To say otherwise is to not care about the tens of millions of victims of American foreign policy who are raped, assaulted, and killed every year. It's to not care about the 9 million people who die of starvation and hunger-related issues every year while America refuses to fulfill its leadership role and to put forth a global farming plan and more that are clearly what should be done. Even with the most basic understanding of economics, in a country where 48% of the adults are said to have a college degree, one should know that we can afford to send $180 billion a year in food aid in the form of farming programs, buying land, creating farms, shipping food from places to places needed, depending on how much farmland they have there, what have you. Everyone should know that. You have to forgive me if I sound like propaganda-ish. You know, they changed my voice and my speech patterns because there's some kind of racist scum that don't want you to hear me say it like I would say it. There's some kind of Dionysian theater art, Zeus rape cult filth who don't respect freedom of expression while they swear up and down that they do, and that's always been the case. America has always been very hypocritical when it comes to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Watch the movie Selma if you don't believe me. Look into the history of it. Look at how much adversity Martin Luther King and Malcolm X faced. Malcolm X being killed in 65 and Martin Luther King in 68. Not that long ago. My father, for example, was born a little bit after World War II. Over 2 decades before Martin Luther King was assassinated, my father was born, and Martin Luther King was assassinated a mere 13 years before I was born. And we see that same hypocrisy, that same culture of racism and hypocrisy perpetuated still. So my next point, point 10. Charlie Kirk says that he does not believe that skin color matters so much, and he says that he wants a country that judges people on the content of their character, like Martin Luther King said, and also competency. It's a sad day when you think that he's right about the second point there, the competency. What happens when you sabotage people for generations? Look up epigenetics if you have any questions about it. It has a generational effect. Yes, people should be qualified to do their jobs. But to judge people on how qualified they are in terms of how much human worth they have is pathetic. To choose to date people who are the offspring of those who sabotage the righteous and other poor people so they could feign superiority is a profound outrage, and only abominations can come from that. They must make amends while there's still time, but on top of everything else, no one of any group should reproduce no matter what. And you should all know why. If you have any questions about that, put in the comments. Generational unjust gain is key. Tech, breeding, cheating, and generational unjust gain. Generational ill-gotten gain. Martin Luther King probably knew that the black community was being sabotaged, so he did not emphasize competency, as he did not know what to do about it, or he did not want to speak on it. It is not fair to sabotage a group for generations and try to force them into a white fraternity supremacy society, etc. And to then turn around and say, well, we will pay people solely based on competency. Now, again, the argument is not whether or not someone who knows how to fly a plane should fly it. The argument is how the wealth should be distributed when you've sabotaged people for generations. And it has affected their offspring. And you've controlled their breeding with an emphasis on trying to prevent them from breeding people who can compete with you effectively in your system. They might say something like, now you can always join a cult and become a transhumanist abomination, and maybe change your gender or sexual orientation and be our slave, and we will pay you more. Clearly a logical and comprehensive plan to compensate the sabotage communities every generation, according to their sabotage and hardship, is what is logical here. Obviously, America must be able to afford it, and obviously the rich should know that there is a difference between their wants and their needs. I mean the rich's wants and their needs. The rich in America have always been immoral and incapable of good governance. Point number 11. The student argues that education is the answer, but there are countless black people with degrees who do not make very much money or are jobless. DEI is also not the answer, but funding minority-owned companies that do not kiss a Freemasonic ass or a social club or frat ass is key here. Now, I'm not saying people shouldn't go to school here, but there's plenty of black people with degrees who get nowhere in life. And that's key here. However, the main enemies of freedom are those who want to unfairly put people beneath them behind the scenes. The main enemies include social clubs, fraternities, and major corporations. However, society needs to restructure the school system, as I have been saying for years. Here I find myself as the most universally wise, insightful, and sense-filled person that ever lived, even though I am sabotaged and the school system was designed to cheat people, especially me, and to confuse people about who was smarter than who for petty reasons that have utterly disgraced the people it sought to benefit. Charlie Kirk embarrasses himself to the extreme at the end by saying he should be kissing the ground, by saying that the student should be kissing the ground, that is, because he is not in Africa, after the student says that his ancestors did not come here by choice. That point was something that was clearly something that Charlie Kirk chose to partake in. Who knows what his long-term plans for his life was? Maybe one day he was going to try to make amends for what he did. But he basically said to somebody who was the offspring of slaves who were taken here during the transatlantic slave trade, which I am not. My dad came here from Nigeria in the late 60s. But he says to this young man that basically it's like saying that he doesn't apologize for slavery. He said that he should kiss the ground that he's on because he has these opportunities that he otherwise wouldn't have. Can you imagine if Pharaoh in ancient Egypt said to the Jews that it doesn't matter that you're a slave, or that if he released them from slavery and continued to oppress them, it doesn't matter that you continue to be oppressed, because Egypt is the greatest country in the world. Look at all their technology compared to a lot of other countries. That's a pathetic argument of just complete worms with not a speck of self-respect, not a speck of decency, and not a speck of respectability in reality. A very depraved argument. A very sick argument. A very cruel and selfish argument. Anyone who's proud of Charlie Kirk is an idiot. And that is the bottom line there. Far more important than not disrespecting someone who's passed away is not disrespecting the masses of righteous people who've passed away, who he has insulted with his white supremacist arrogance. That was a typical conservative moment, and the reason why no serious and moral person respects conservatives. One could chop it up to that and say, hey, that in a nutshell embodies the reason that no serious and moral person respects conservatives. However, he brought up a useful fact, and I assume he is right to say that people